Today, we're going to go on and film the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. In our tongue, we call it the Church of the Anastasis, or Knesset al-Qiyamah, which means the Church of the Resurrection. It's Christianity, holiest ground, as that is the place where Jesus was crucified, buried, and resurrected at. That is the nucleus of our faith, but that's also the nucleus of the Christian history. When they have called it to be the center of the world, the navel of the universe, indeed it is the navel ground of Christianity. And we're going to be starting at the church or the monastery of Alexander Nevsky. It's basically part of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Within its grounds, we have a lot of remains, a lot of ruins that would give us a very good introduction about the history of the church. Just to give you an example to start with, try to look at the arch which is standing above me. This would have been part of the triumphal arch of Hadrian, which was built over here in 135 AD. Right outside the complex, that's where we had the forum of the city. And once we walk a little bit further in, once we venture a little bit further in, that's where we go to where Hadrian built the temple dedicated to the goddess called Fortuna, or Venus, and to Jupiter, what has been referred to as the Capitolonia, that is the Capitol Hill. The city in those days was called Aelia Capitolonia, so called after the emperor Publius Aelius Hadrianus. From here we start our journey of 3 episodes. The first one, we're going to venture into the location of the crucifixion and burial of Jesus, church history. In episode 2, we're going to go on and focus on Calvary, Golgotha, and on the 3rd episode, we're going to go and talk in depth about the tomb, the empty tomb of Christ. Join me on our quest, on our journey. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is venerated for being the crucifixion and the burial and the resurrection place of Jesus. How would this place would have looked like 2,000 years ago? Well, let's try to summarize it briefly. First, we're outside the walls of the city, which used to be around 10 meters from where we are to the east. A quarry would have stood over here covering about 1.5 acres, which came out of use in the 1st century BC. Taking in consideration that the quarry itself was in use all the way from the 8th century BC. Main roads passed by. 2 gates were nearby. About 120 meters away to the south, that's where we had the Ginat Gate, which means the Garden's Gate. While about 300-400 meters to the north of where we are, that's where we had the North Gate, today known as the Damascus Gate. So we're outside the walls of the city. We're by 2 main gates where a lot of traffic passed through. And we're in an area which the locals over here started using as a vegetable garden, but also as a necropolis, okay, to bury the dead at. This was an ideal place for the Romans to use it as an execution hill. After all, we had a prominent hill, part of the quarry, which was known as Golgotha, most probably because of the exterior shape of it that looked like a skull, and it's on the main road. So if the Romans wanted to go on and have a public show, there's no better place in Jerusalem than this spot where we are right now. Here is the spot where Jesus would have been brought, crucified, and buried at. Whether his judgment took place at the Western Palace or the Eastern Palace is not important. After all, it doesn't matter which one of them. They would have had to lead him all the way to the Ginat Gate and then into the quarry to Golgotha, where he would be crucified. And just right nearby the crucifixion place, that's where there was a newly dug tomb which belonged to a rich man known as Joseph of Arimathea, where the body of Jesus was taken and entered. 3 days later, the Lord is risen. You can imagine for his followers and those who believe that Jesus is God, that Jesus is the Messiah, that this becomes over here a center of worship, of veneration. So, and in particular, the empty tomb. So early Christians used to come and venerate the tomb, the empty tomb, worship by it. 70 AD, Jerusalem was destroyed. The Christians of Jerusalem fled all the way to Pella, about 50 miles away from where we are. 71 AD, they come back and they go back again to the same spot, venerating the empty tomb of Jesus. Things would go smoothly, but try to remember, Jerusalem is in ruins. And in 130 AD, the Emperor Hadrian decided to rebuild the city in a Roman style, calling it Aelia Capitolonia. The emperor's name was Publius Aelius Hadrianus. The Jews reacted violently, the revolt of Bar Kokhba. Hadrian comes himself and quelled that revolt, and then construct the city, changing its name, as we mentioned, to Aelia Capitolonia, and wherever there was a site which was holy to the Jews or Judeo-Christians, he put a temple on the top of it, in a way trying to eradicate the history or the Jews themselves. Judeo-Christians were associated with the Jews. For that reason, the place of Calvary and the tomb, Hadrian would have came and built a temple which he have called the Capitolonia. And this is where we are right now. I mean, just imagine the wall that I'm touching over here and the one which is just a little bit behind it. These are the walls of the temple of Venus, of Fortuna. We're standing over here at where the entrance of the temple used to be. The interesting thing is that the shape of the temple that Hadrian built was a copy or modeled after that of the Temple of Jerusalem, that even stones, look over here, this one for example, that even Herodian stones from the temple were brought and put in a second use. The temple looked as following: atrium, a stairway coming all the way from the streets, the corridor, through the atrium, then the stairway over here would have went all the way to a basilica-style structure, that is the temple itself, where on Calvary, the statue of Venus would have stood, while over the tomb, the statue of Jupiter. Luckily, for Hadrian to be able to build over this quarry, he needed a platform. So he came and he filled the whole complex over here with dirt, not knowing that in his act, he is sparing Christianity, holiest ground, Calvary, and the tomb. The Temple of Hadrian would have dominated the scenery of Jerusalem all the way from the year 135 AD till the year 325 AD. Throughout this period, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the Christians of Jerusalem, did not forget where the crucifixion place would have taken place, that even it's believed that part of Calvary itself was visible. 306 AD, that's when Constantine becomes an emperor. 313 AD, what is known as the Edict of Milan, that's where the emperor shows tolerance to all other religions than paganism, including Christianity. From that year, Christians could go and worship freely, no more persecution. Let's remember that Constantine's mother, Queen Helen, was a Christian. It is said to be that Constantine himself became, victorious when he would have taken the sign of the cross, fighting his enemies. That's when Christianity gains more favor in the eyes of the emperor. He would even start being involved in solving up the problems and the arguments within the church itself. 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea have took place. That's when the Patriarch of Jerusalem, or the Bishop of Jerusalem, known as Marcus, would have traveled all the way to Constantinople, and he would have went on and presented to the emperor that Christianity's holiest grounds are defiled by the temple which was built by Hadrian. As the historian Eusebius tells us, through the book known as The Life of Constantine, the emperor himself gave immediate instructions to open the treasury, the imperial treasury, and to finance the building of a shrine over where Jesus was crucified and buried. Marcus comes back. It is said to be that 326 AD, Queen Helen The mother of Constantine herself came over here, and immediately the Temple of Hadrian was dismantled. And of course, Eusebius will say that all the stones will be taken and should be thrown away, wasted, because these are defiled stones. But nowadays, we know that many elements of that temple, many architectural elements, were taken by the Byzantine Christians and have been put in second use with the building of the church. The church, which was known as the Martyrian, or the Church of the Anastasis, the Church of the Resurrection. We're going to go on a journey trying to explore that church and see how much of it is still visible today. It occupied the same line of that of Hadrian's temple. Right outside this wall, that's where we had the Cordo Maximus, the main street of Jerusalem. And the atrium of the church was dominated by three entryways or three doorways from the east, bringing you into the sanctuary. I'm standing over here by one of them because only two of them have survived. So one of them is visible over here. The second is a bit further to the north of where we are, within a bakery known as Zalatimos Bakery. Trust me, they are known for great cheese pies. Still, that is not Byzantine. That's not what we're here to talk about. We're talking about the Byzantine church that we're going to go on and try to explore. It consisted of four parts. The atrium, here, I'm walking right now on its floor. It led me all the way into the basilica, what was known as the Martyrian. And right behind it, there was a second atrium. Atrium is a colonnaded court. The second atrium was known as the triportico because it had three rows of pillars, like a U shape. And within it, outdoor, we had the Rock of Calvary. At the back end, a circular or semicircular church would have stood, known as the Rotunda. That is the Anastasius, where in the center of it lies Christianity, holiest spot, the empty tomb of Jesus. So let's go and try to see how much of the Byzantine church is visible, taking consideration that 614 AD, the Persians came, put the church to fire, caused a lot of damage to the church itself, and when Modestus, the Bishop of Jerusalem, decided to reconstruct it in 629 AD, for the first time, the atrium and the basilica would have been left out in ruins, and Calvary and the tomb would become to form the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. To the streets of Jerusalem, to the area of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, let's go and see how much we have of the Byzantine Church, leading to the Persian destruction, all the way to the Crusader period, as the present-day church is dating back to that period of time. On we go. So, we left St. Alexander Nevsky, and basically we're standing right now where the facade or the entrance of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre would have stood in the Byzantine period. This is the meat market. Right behind it we have the spice market and then the cotton market, and a bit forward we do have what they call the Malkukeri market. All this used to be part of the Cardo. Worth mentioning that in the Cardo we do have a replica, a copy of Medaba mosaic, which shows Jerusalem during the Byzantine period, and it does show the Church of the Holy Sepulchre the way it looked like in the 6th century AD, which of course would have given us an image about Constantine Church, how it looked like in the 4th century AD. The Cardo, from the Cardo, there would be the stairway leading all the way into the atrium, to the basilica, then all the way to the triportico, which is basically the second atrium where Calvary would have stood, leading all the way into the rotunda of the Anastasis. So we're going to walk along the Cardo. Remember, this is where the entrance of the church used to be. So we just left the market, that's where the corridor used to be, took a couple of steps up, leaving up the ground level where the entrance of the church used to be. Down a bit below us, that's where we have that cheese pie bakery, which is known as Zalatimo, where within the storage room, we do have one of these entranceways we spoke about leading inside or into the atrium of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. If you're to look above me, you can see the St. Alexander Nevsky Church. We're right now outside it. That's where the facade of the church used to be. And let's remember that the walls of the city used to be just about 10 meters from where I'm standing toward the east. The atrium below us, and over there we can see right now the rotunda of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Let's remember, in the Byzantine era we did not have two domes, we had just the large dome at the back, which would have been of the rotunda of the Anastasis. From here we start coming all the way into the basilica. Bits and pieces of it have been found, so we have quite a good idea about the shape of the basilica, which would have consisted of the main nave, two aisles on each side of it, and the rooftop of it was made of wood covered up with lead to protect the church itself, or to protect the rooftop of the church. So let's walk into the basilica. The rooftop of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The present-day rooftop. Right below us, that's where we have the Chapel of Queen Helen, where according to tradition, she found the true cross. Let's remember, this chapel during the Byzantine era was not in use, it was filled up. It only comes to be in use from the 7th century AD. The basilica would have came all the way to an end over here, so we're basically on the western side of the basilica. Direction of prayer was not east, it was westward in the Byzantine church. Well, after all, it is facing the Holy Tomb. Perhaps where the altar would have stood, above it there used to be a window through which the attendees of the services or the masses taking place in the basilica would have been able to go on and see parts of Calvary. St. Cyril, who was born in Caesarea, grew up in Jerusalem, probably saw Hadrian's temple, maybe he was a witness for the dismantling of the temple itself, and the beginning of the construction of the church. He goes on talking or gives us references about how the church would have looked like, which the first part of it were rapidly built. The only part which was not finished during the life of Constantine would have been the rotunda itself. This we know from Egeria that it was only completed in the year 380 AD. So St. Cyril, in his lectures to the catechumens, he gives us an insight about the church. Within the basilica, he talks, where we're standing, he talks about the constitution of the church. Perhaps seeing Calvary through the window over here, or he might have been standing at the baptistry, just which was located all the way on the southern part of the church. He would be able to see Calvary, and he goes on talking to the catechumens and says, this Golgotha, he's pointing Golgotha, where our Lord was crucified, where his hands was stretched from one end to another, from one end of the world to the end of the earth. This would be the beginning of a tradition pointing Calvary to be the center of the universe, despite the fact that Origen refers to that earlier, in the 3rd century AD. On Easter Sunday, that's where at the baptistry the catechumens would have been baptized. In another lecture given to the catechumens after the baptismal, they would be looking, they're within the rotunda, which is yet not completed, they're looking all the way at the tomb, which obviously the edicule, the little house, was already constructed on the top of it. And he goes on saying, this empty tomb, once again, he's pointing the tomb over here, this empty tomb testifies to the resurrection of our Lord Jesus. So we're going all the way through the little chapels of the Ethiopian complex, which will take us all the way to the parvis, or the courtyard of the church. And slowly we're coming right now to explore the Crusader church that's over here, that we can see its arches standing right in front of us. If you are to look at the upper base of the pillars over here, which is actually, if you were to look at the shape of it, looks like an arm. This is a new architecture that the Crusaders would have introduced. Instead of placing big pillars to support up the roof dome, they started placing over here arches, pediment arches, with what we can call a third of a pillar to support up the dome. Try to look at the crossover here within the circle. It's made of two bones in the middle of the circle to make it as the center of the universe. Once again, referring all the way to Gologtha as the omphalos, which means the center of the world. The Chapel of St. Michael. To conclude with the Byzantine Church, Egeria, she does mention, for example, the faithful gathering at the foot of Calvary, whether it was a rainy day or a fine day for their midday prayers. She also does mention the marvelous construction work of Constantine, who spared no treasures or efforts in the building of the church. For example, at the back end of the basilica, the martyrion, which means a witness, as from it you could see the Calvary and the empty tomb, the capitals of it were all covered with silver. The floor of the church was all covered with mosaics. Unfortunately, that church was badly damaged in the year 614 AD as a result of the Persian invasion. Modestus, the Bishop of Jerusalem, who would be the one to reconstruct the church, he had to go on and leave out the atrium and the basilica, focusing on Calvary and the tomb. The rotunda would still remain the same of that of Constantine, with the restoration work. Calvary, however, for the first time, it is brought indoor. A two-story structure was constructed on it. The upper floor would have been the tip of Calvary where the cross would have stood, while the lower chapel would have been dedicated to Adam. Already Origen in the 3rd century AD, St. Cyril in the 4th century AD, they do refer to Adam, or to tradition which has to do with Adam buried at the foot of Calvary. They do refer to Calvary to be the center of the universe. The traditions of that of the Holy of the Holies, of the rock within the Holy of the Holies, were moved from there, that is of the Temple of Jerusalem, all the way to the Calvary within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. As in Adam we all die, in Jesus we all are saved. So, Adam Chapel, drops of blood flowing from the body of Christ on Adam's skull, healing us from the original sin. In 1009 AD, the Fatimid governor of Egypt, Hakim, gave instructions to destroy the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, along other churches and synagogues which were in the city. The destruction was undescribable, not leaving a stone over another. They literally came with hammers, knocking down Calvary and the tomb. 1045 AD, Monomachus IX, he gets permission to restore the church. His restoration was very basic. The very same rotunda, that of Constantine, they work on it, in addition to 3 chapels which were added nearby the church. This is exactly what the Crusaders would have found in the year 1099 AD, when they have entered the city on the 15th of July of the year 1099 AD. The Crusaders took over the city. The Crusaders have seen themselves as the liberators of the Holy City, the liberators of the Holy Sepulchre. Actually, the first king, Godfrey de Bouillon, called himself the guardian of the Holy Sepulchre. Also, the Crusaders have seen themselves and called themselves the New Israel. For them, there were 2 sacred grounds within the Holy City, the Holy Sepulchre and that of the Temple Mount, where Solomon's temple stood, which was occupied during those days by 2 mosques, the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. Worth mentioning that the Dome of the Rock, its dome was modeled after the dome of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. At the Dome of the Rock, they turned it into a church, calling it Templum Dominum. Al-Aqsa Mosque became a temporary residential area for the kings of Jerusalem. Let's remember the two domes that we have at the Temple Mount. When they reached the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which was in a devastating shape, they had two options: dismantle the edifice and put a new one, or just restore the building itself. They have decided, and they have chosen a middle way. Restore the old edifice, adding to it, and now mirroring the two domes of the Temple Mount. The dome of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre over the Rotunda, which is about 70 feet in diameter, and the second one which they constructed, half in size to that of the main dome, over the Catholicon, the center of the earth. Vaulted arches, Romanesque in style, as a transept connecting the terrestrial ground of Calvary and the celestial ground of the Holy Tomb. Without any exaggeration, we're standing in front of a Crusader edifice using a main part of the Byzantine one. It's the best example of a Romanesque style architecture in the East. The Parvis, the courtyard where we are, a colonnaded structure, missing today the columns because they were taken by the Muslims to Mecca in the 13th century AD. A bell tower, which used to be 3 stories higher than what we see today. The facade of the church. A stairway that led all the way to the Chapel of the Franks, which was dedicated to Our Lady of Sorrows. Reaching Calvary, passing and praying by where the cross stood. A stairway took you all the way into the choir, the omphalos, the center of the world, all the way to the tomb. An upper corridor called the Galleria, with a beautiful Crusader architecture and capitals that was used by the priests to have access to Calvary, connecting it all the way to the tomb. Back again to the facade, which used to be the exit or the southern entrance. Try to look at the arches, typical Crusader architecture. And one thing to notice that we have over here, 9 pillars, none of them is identical. The Crusaders had no problem to go and have different pillars, different colors, different designs in use. Some of these pillars are in second and third use. The Crusaders would have paved the grounds of the church with tiles made of local stone. Frescoes and mosaics decorated the walls and the roofing or the ceiling of the chapels within the church. Few examples of that can still be seen at the Chapel of Queen Helen, the mother of Constantine, which is a Crusader addition, and a beautiful mosaic image of Jesus, the ascension of Jesus, which we can see all the way up in Calvary. The capitals with the acanthus leaves. If you were to look at that one, for example, you can see it twisting all the way around. Beautiful marble reliefs covered up the upper entrance of the church, which today we have them at the Rockefeller Museum. The one which stood over the main doorway or over what we call the western doorway carried up the procession demonstrating Jesus' last week, from Bethany to Palm Sunday to the Last Supper and the empty tomb. Well, this one over here had images of cantors and sirens, pagan, yep, but just to show the fall of man into sin, salvation through the blood of Jesus. Romanesque in style. Massive, gigantic pillars, vaulted arches, which we can see a main part of it through the ambulatory corridor that goes within the church, connecting Calvary to the tomb. Unfortunately, 1808, a fire caused a lot of damage to the church. I mean, try just to think of the dome, which was made of wood, caving in. The Greek Orthodox would be the ones to go on and do most of the restoration, giving the church the present day look. Access to Calvary would not be from here. You go inside the church, a stairway will take you all the way to Calvary. The stone of unction, the Catholicon, the Greek Orthodox main part of the church today, the tomb, the Coptic chapel behind it, the Syriac Orthodox chapel at the back, where we have the traditional burial place of Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, a church which in a way is ran by 6 denominations, 6 Christian denominations, 3 major and 3 minor. The major is the Roman Catholic, Armenian Orthodox, and Greek Orthodox. The minors are Ethiopian, Coptic, and Syriacs. Our focal point is Calvary and the tomb. That's what we're going to go and cover in the second and the third episode of our series.